All right, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here this week. We are basically running a show talking all about KubeCon and all the stuff going on there this week with what I hear is 12,000 people in one place in San Diego, which is crazy. And if you haven't been to this show before, I do this live almost every Thursday. We've been doing it over a year, and we talk about containers and specifically DevOps practices around containers and all that entails. So we're always talking about Docker and Kubernetes and Swarm and proxies and all the other parts of Containerland. And this show is a live show, which means you get to ask questions in chat, and we will work through the show and answer them, as well as doing demos, talking about news and all the other things. So make sure you get your questions in early because we'll be answering them throughout the show. If you're listening to this afterwards, then know to come back here on Thursdays and subscribe and click the little bell that will ring when we go live, so you'll see a notification whenever we're live and you can come hang out with us. So thanks for being here. And on the show this week, I'm very excited because we've been talking and planning about this for a month, and it just happens to be the show on the week of KubeCon. So welcome to the show, Gérald Croës, who's from France but currently in San Diego at KubeCon. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm glad that we got this. The Wi-Fi worked. Everything worked because it's always challenging at shows, right? Yeah. And let me tell you a little bit about him. He's the VP of Engineering at Containous, and if you don't know who that is, they are the company that makes Traefik, which is that logo on his shirt there. He's been working in IT for 20 years now and assumed many different roles, including developer, speaker, software architect, enterprise architect, CTO, developer, and now is the VP of Engineering at Containous. He is somehow always managing to work on open source projects, and his history with Docker is closely related to how Traefik was born. And he joins us today from San Diego, like I said. So thanks again for being here. Tell us about the show. Like, what have you been to sessions? You're probably hanging out with friends and catching up with people, but give us your take.
Yeah, I wish I could have attended some shows, but unfortunately, there are so many people, and the crowd is the booth is so overcrowded that unfortunately I wasn't able to attend anything apart from welcoming people at the booth, talking with the community. We've had great feedback from users, great conversation. That's mostly what my days were at the KubeCon.
Yeah,
it is incredible there. Like 11,000, maybe 12,000 people. We have 2 conference hall full of sponsors.
Yeah, it's I'm sure it's a maze, and I think the largest one I've ever been to on a regular basis was Microsoft's old Tech Ed conferences, which they were always 10 to 15,000 people. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if this continues to grow, because 3 years ago it was a tiny little conference compared to what it is now. So every year it feels like it's not quite, almost doubled in size. And so obviously they can only go so big. There's only so many places that can fit 20,000 people. So we'll see what next year entails.
Yeah.
So, all right, you were in the booth talking all about Traefik and the other tools that you guys make all week long. So why don't we just jump right into the Traefik stuff? But actually, before that, let's check the questions and see if anyone has. We got some people on from Berlin. Hello. Michael is here, another Docker captain, and hence when we do have some questions unrelated. A question about Docker CE 1909. I have no idea. I haven't heard anything about that. So we'll see when Docker wants to announce it. I haven't even seen any betas yet, so I'm not sure when that's going to come out. And everyone else, we have people from Oregon. So hello. So real quick, what are people? I mean, obviously they're talking about stuff at the booth, but I've talked to some people, and they were saying that everyone, of course, is still talking about the Docker news from last week. So I just wanted to bring it up because it's definitely a big thing. So we had the show last week, and we had a special show with other Docker captains on just to talk all about the news of Docker splitting the company and selling off their enterprise business and then refocusing their efforts back on developer tools, which is kind of like the OG Docker back 6 years ago was what they were really focused on, just making it easy for developers to build and deploy apps. So there was a call today that was from Mirantis, the company that bought the enterprise stuff. And for those of you that are going to ask on the call, because I'm sure people are going to give us the questions, I just want to get it out of the way now before we get into Traefik demos and all sorts of cool stuff, is that what we do know is that Swarm is definitely supported for at least 2 years, and they're very interested in seeing feedback from their paying customers in the community on whether they want to see continued support for Swarm or if everybody's going to eventually move to Kubernetes. So I think that will largely be determined over the next few years by how many of the customers still want to have features and pay for that support. So those of you that are wondering, that's that. Of course, I'm a big fan of Traefik on Swarm, so we won't be demoing specific to Swarm stuff today, but if you have those questions, feel free to throw them in, and we'll get to them later. And what else was there on the call? I think they were talking about a conference. A lot of people on the show have asked about DockerCon because everyone's at KubeCon and thinking, okay, when's DockerCon next year? Because those are the two big container conferences, and we don't know yet, although they still are talking about what conferences next year will look like for Mirantis and Docker. So we'll keep you posted on that. So that's the news, I guess, of the week. Of course, at KubeCon, there's not a lot of news in the keynotes because it's all open source. So typically we all know what's already happened in open source. So there's not like surprise reveals of new products. But you all were talking about Traefik, and Traefik 2.0 came out like 2 months ago, I believe.
Yeah, 2 months ago. I believe too.
yeah, somewhere around there. I think it was September sometime when I remember tweeting about it. And, 1.0 was around for years, and 2.0 had some major new features. So why don't we just jump into it? Let's talk about some of those 2.0 things, because like a lot of these people, I'm still using 1.0, haven't made the jump yet to 2.0. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, sure. So 2.0, with 2.0, our efforts were really focused on making every breaking changes we had to make to have features that weren't possible with 1.7, 1.x. These features, especially one of the main feature that came with 2.0 was TCP support. And we really had to rebuild the internal architecture of Traefik to make that happen. We also jumped on to add middleware support, which is basically a way to configure everything that has nothing to do with the pure routing part. If you want to tweak the request before it's sent to your service, and you want to combine that in many different ways, this is where you have to look for. The configuration is definitely more consistent, and there are, many different things you can do with it. Also, what we've been working on for Traefik 2 is the Kubernetes CRD. We have our own Kubernetes CRD. Because the problem with the Ingress version 1, let's say, was that the common definition was just the root of what you can do for routing, but unfortunately, vendor specifications. And even though you could believe that having this Ingress version 1 was enough, and that you could switch from an Ingress controller to another, it wasn't really the case because of these vendor-specific annotations that weren't super easy to configure. So many Ingress controllers have made the switch and have developed their own CRDs, and we went to the same direction.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, and that's interesting too, right? Because to talk about that for a second, so those of you that are not aware, so Kubernetes has a feature that Swarm and other orchestrators don't necessarily have out of the box called Ingress, and it's, I believe, still in beta, but the idea is that you can do HTTP specific proxying with pre-built commands and functionality that then any proxy company could then write their code, their APIs against, and essentially create a uniform process for setting up proxies for your applications, right? So, but you're saying with 2.0, you're basically you've got more stuff, and it's easier if you don't use that. So that's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah, it makes more sense to configure like everything with a proper CRD where everything has a proper definition. Like if you want to use middleware, you don't have to put a huge block of configuration in your route.
Yeah. So getting back to the some of the other features. I'm sorry. Actually, I might have interrupted you. Was there other features on the list?
Oh no. Yeah, we have a new routing rule syntax that makes it easier to add operators and combine the rules for easy routing.
Yeah.
We have cross support at the same time. So one of the main advantages of Traefik is that it is compatible with many different orchestrators, whether it's Docker, whether it's Kubernetes, whether you want to have a plain configuration file, why not? Either you want to have a key value store to store your configuration. And with Traefik, you can combine configuration sources and to make it work with all of them at the same time. So this cross-provider support is nice because you can configure a middleware and reuse that middleware from Kubernetes, from Docker, from Mesos if you use Mesos.
Okay.
So the cross-provider was a thing.
Yeah.
And we've introduced also better ways to do mirroring, to do canary deployments. We've reworked on the web UI, on the dashboard. We've added many different tweaks for the TLS configuration. So it was a huge release with many features.
Yeah.
But at some point we had to stop and release the software. You know?
Right. Yeah, leave something for 3.0. Why don't you? Like, what are you gonna?
Yeah. Oh, we already have ideas, but
yeah. So let's talk more about the TCP real quick. The TCP feature set, that's not necessarily obvious to someone who's only familiar with web proxies. What would be a good example of when you would use the TCP feature?
I could talk about a classic example. I might have a diagram. Like it's a candid example, but still. I don't know if I can share my screen.
Yeah.
So I will do that. So here, don't know if you can see it. So a classic example of TCP support is when you have a database. And here in the example, imagine you have your traffic on your cluster, and you want traffic to route either the dashboard that is pure HTTP or requests to Mongo itself, which are sent in TCP, pure TCP. So with Traefik, on the same port and at the same time, you can have it route requests to your Mongo database with or without TLS, and also to your classic dashboard. And Traefik will just handle everything, whether it's HTTP or TCP. So that's a common use case. You don't have to have two separate tools to handle these.
Yeah. And semi-related to that, we got a question. Does Traefik replace the need for Nginx Ingress or Istio?
I like to believe so. Well, you need features. You need an Ingress controller.
Right.
You might need service mesh. You need your service to communicate with each other. So that's the need, and there are tools to help you with that. And our take on these tools with Traefik or Mesh, we might talk about that later, is that it should be simple. You mustn't be an expert at networking you don't have to be an expert in ops or anything to be able to deploy your services, to connect them together, to make them available to your customers. Everything should be simple.
Right. And my take on that, for the person asking, is I absolutely prefer Traefik over Ingress just because I get so much more out of the box, and it's a lot less effort. I've lost count of how many people in my courses are asking for a functioning Nginx config to do a simple proxying of a website, and then like how do they manage their certificates and all that stuff. Well, the thing that really initially got me excited, and when I started using Traefik very early days, was when the Let's Encrypt support was built in, and it was designed to essentially not have to completely restart in order to change the configuration. So those two things, where it was meant for a world where we're deploying containers rapidly and we need to update our proxy configs in real time, and then at the same time, just providing me that Let's Encrypt SSL automation without having to go find certbot and a bunch of other tools and then plug those in to try to get the whole thing working. It's kind of a one-line deployment in my mind. So that's my thing.
It is.
Yeah, and then Istio, that's a whole different ball of wax, right? Like that's service mesh, which we probably will get to later.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And let's see, what else? What other rabbit holes can we go down? Let's see. Someone's asking about HTTP 3. I don't know anything about HTTP 3. I didn't even know that was a thing on the horizon.
So it is a thing. I confirm that it is on the roadmap. Like we have people already working on it. And we would like to have it supported for maybe not 2.1, of course, because we are in RC right now, but probably 2.2 will have the first draft for HTTP 3 support.
Okay. Good to know. I'm going to have to go read up on that now.
Yeah.
I'm still learning HTTP 2. Yeah.
Oh.
Let's see. Does Cert Resolver displace Cert Manager in our K8's deployments? Boy, this is a good specific question.
Oh, what was the question again?
Yeah, he's asking. I'm assuming I'm not sure who it is. They are asking. Cert Resolver does Cert Resolver displace Cert Manager in our K8's deployments?
Oh, so our Cert Resolver is our system to retrieve certificates for your routes. Basically, it's a new system. So either you have configured certificates in Traefik, either you configure a Cert Resolver to retrieve the certificates for you, and you can configure actually a Cert Resolver for Let's Encrypt integration we just talked about. And Cert Manager is a third-party tool, so that will help you integrate with Let's Encrypt, and you can configure Cert Manager along with Traefik if you want to have an HA deployment of Traefik and still use Let's Encrypt for certificate management. Yes.
Yeah, and that's the idea. For those of you who haven't used Traefik before, that's the idea is that needing to get certificates is an assumption of the project out of the box. So unlike most other proxies where you have to solve your own certificate problems, Traefik has that as a day one feature. I don't know if it was literally day one, but when the day I started using it, Let's Encrypt was a built-in feature. And that's really great because there's so much. You go to conferences and everyone's telling you everything is supposed to be SSL, and then it's your burden as the developer or DevOps person or whatever, the ops person, that you now have to figure out your cert infrastructure for just how do I keep them, where do I store them, how do I, there's so many decisions there that it's a project, and I feel like this really lowers the bar.
I remember the days when I had to configure my certificates, to buy them, to renew them, and these were not happy days.
Yeah, and it didn't scale, right? Because how are you going to do 100 websites at different endpoints? Like, that's why people start buying wildcards because you only wanted to do it
Yeah.
once, and you'd buy the certificate for 5 years, and you'd put it in for 5 years, and then when the certificate gets, now everyone has a copy of the certificate. It's everywhere. Every admin has a copy on their desk. It's like, it's just bad. So I think the Let's Encrypt model has really not only provided free SSL for internet accessible servers, but I think it's sort of creating this model where internal infrastructure is now more likely to be automated than the old horrible approach of downloading certificates from a website and then bundling them together with a script and then all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And since you mentioned it, Wildcard certificates with Let's Encrypt is also a new feature available in Traefik 2. In Traefik 1, you couldn't generate Wildcard certificates with Let's Encrypt, but in version 2 you can. So that's a neat tweak we added there.
Yeah, I like it, and it's funny because I was using it, but I guess I thought I was using Wildcard, but I guess I didn't really pay attention. This was for a pet project I use when I'm demoing stuff. I have a domain, and I just essentially I point that domain in DNS and as the wildcard to everything, and then Traefik just goes and gets the certs for whatever containers I deploy automatically. Like it just knows the name because I put them in the metadata, and so I never actually went to pay attention to the individual certs to see if they were individual or a wildcard based cert. So it's funny you say that because I didn't realize I wasn't getting one. It just works.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not the only one, because on support we see many different crazy architectures, and we've had multiple times users ending up with gigabytes of certificates that had been generated with Traefik.
Yeah. So I know you brought some demos, and the people on YouTube are always happy to check out demos. So what would you like to show off?
Well, I can show the basics for how you would set up or configure Traefik on a Docker Compose file with 2 services, like how you would expose that.
Okay.
Using Traefik. It is pretty straightforward. Well, hopefully. So I will, I guess, share my screen. So it'll be. So I guess you can see my screen. So here, so we have a basic Compose file with 2 different services. The first one I called HTTP1, the second one I called HTTP2. So I won't launch these services, but if you want to expose them with Traefik, actually all you have to do is to have a Traefik instance that will call Traefik. It's version 2.0.4. I will add a specific command argument to launch Traefik. The first one when I launch Traefik is to enable the logs. So since it's a demo and problems happen during a demo, like typos, especially when you use YAML, I will put the logs in info. Since we want Traefik to connect to Docker, I will add Docker as the provider, because Traefik is compatible with many different orchestrators, and this is what we call provider. And just adding providers Docker enables the Docker integration. Then I will activate the dashboard, because it's always nice to see what's going on. The dashboard in Traefik 1 used to be, you could enable the dashboard in an insecure way, and this is something we didn't really like. So in version 2, if you want to enable the dashboard without configuring the security around the dashboard, you have to explicitly say that you want the dashboard to be insecure. So it's a quick and easy way to see what's going on, but it's clearly not aimed at production. And then Traefik needs what we call an entry point. An entry point is basically the port where the request will end. And I will add the port 80, so it will get the request from the outside. Since we have configured the Docker provider, Traefik needs to be aware of what's going on in your Docker stack. So what we'll do is we'll add access to the Docker stock. It's Docker stock, okay? And that will be the same. And now we also want to redirect everything from port 80 to Traefik and from port 8080 to Traefik. Hopefully I haven't made any typo here.
Well, and it's important. I think it's important to point out that for those of you watching, and you're maybe not savvy with Traefik configuration, is that the significance here is that this is augmenting the startup command, not providing a different configuration file, which you can do, right? Like you can have a TOML file in there, I think, right?
Yeah, you can definitely, yes. I chose to have everything in the Docker compose file, but I could have totally choose a simple TOML file and even a YAML file in Traefik 2, because YAML was a extremely popular demand from the community to have YAML support. And after many different arguments, we included it in the product. So yeah, basically, we've launched Traefik. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, sorry. The significance of that I'm not sure if people realize is that the advantage here over almost everything else I've tried is that when you want to deploy a proxy, you don't have to then figure out a way to store a config somewhere and then, because if you're not using something like Swarm or Kubernetes and you just want to launch a container that proxies some other container, there's that dilemma for people when they're first starting out of, do I take the config and store it in the Docker image, or do I, put it somewhere and then mount it into the container on startup to config the proxy? This is a very classic example of something like Nginx. And the nice thing with Traefik is it gives you that choice. I just wanted to point it out because it's one of my favorite features is that I don't have to create a config file and learn the config format. I can just add it, the little lines to the command that basically override the startup. And I can use either one, and then I can save the effort, because we were using these before orchestration, but now now that we have config maps in Kubernetes and configs in Swarm, sure, I suppose you could store your config file there, but you don't have to, I guess is the point I'm making. So please continue.
Yeah, and I can actually show how we will configure the routes themselves. So here we have configured the dashboard, which is on port 8080 by default. And we see Traefik's dashboard, and we see that we have 3 configured routers, 3 different services. We have the 2 ports we've configured. And one thing that is really interesting here is that, so out of the box, we just added Traefik to the Docker Compose file, and it detected automatically the other containers, so the HTTP1 application, the HTTP2 applications that we can see there, and created some routes automatically for you. So like this one, for example. So if we send a request to HTTP1, it will just forward it to the service. So it's really a big application, but not localhost. It's this one. So it's just a service that shows the information it got from the request, but here we are. Traefik has been launched, no configuration apart from listen to Docker, and your services are exposed. So that's pretty neat. What I could do, because the route is not really interesting, of course, is I will just configure the route with a simple label. So if I want to, in Traefik, everything is either a router, a service, or an entry point. Basically, the routers are responsible for everything that is routing to the service, and services are everything that needs to be configured to reach the actual service you've written. So here we want to add a specific rule, like what is the URL I want this service, I want for this service. So I will say, hey, Traefik, I will configure something that is related to HTTP. It will be about routers, and I will treat a router for HTTP1. I can choose any kind of name here, and I will specify a rule, and I want this service to be available on http1.localhost. And all I have to do, I will docker compose, and I will restart just the container http1. Then if I go back to my routers, I see that Traefik has automatically detected the change and has updated the route from an automatic name, generated name, to the rule. So if I go back here and go with HTTP1 localhost, here we go. We have the route has been updated, so that's nice.
Yeah.
So everything, as you said, everything is just dynamic. You attach the configuration to your containers, and they are it is automatically discovered by Traefik, and no restart whatsoever. And same for the load balancing part. If we look at the service itself here, we can see that Traefik sees only one server, and if we scale, let's say scale, and we put here 10 instances. We'll see that Traefik will just see the new servers and will just load balance the calls. So we can see in the host name there that it will load balance between every instance for your service.
And I'm watching the new dashboard too, because I'm noticing how that's quite quite different than the old one.
Yeah, it is different. What we wanted to show, there were two goals. I will say with the dashboard, the new dashboard, the first one was to show people how you would typically configure Traefik. What were the concepts that were important to Traefik? So the what you are actually listening to, the routers, how you configure the routes, what are the things in the request you are interested in to handle the request, the services, so what you have developed, what is published on your cluster, and middleware, and I will go back to middleware in a minute, and same for TCP. And also, one thing we absolutely wanted to show was that Traefik out of the box has many bundled extra features that go beyond routing, and some people weren't aware of that. So we added specific buttons to show them, hey, you could enable your access log, you could enable the metrics integration or tracing integration. You should turn that on, and don't leave that off. So, and also cool. The fact that we are compatible with multiple providers. So out of the box, we really wanted people to see what was possible with Traefik. And the other thing with the middlewares, especially, we wanted to show every route, how every route was configured. So here you can see that this router, HTTP1, listens to two different entry points, and the router and then goes to that service, and you can see if it uses TLS, middlewares, and so on.
Very cool. So I didn't know if you were done. I was gonna move on to a new question.
Oh, yeah, you can ask questions because I could also show you many different things. I can enable middlewares. I can enable TLS. I don't know how much time you would like to dedicate to the demo. So I will make a pause here.
Yeah. Well, let
Let me
me.
just.
Yeah, and I would love to sit here for 2 hours and demo everything on it. I think a lot of this stuff is stuff that people need, and they just don't. They're either doing it, they don't do it, or it's like like TLS, like they just don't, or they do it some more difficult way that's much more time consuming and painful. But the question I was going to ask was, I don't know much about the Enterprise Edition. So if I remember correctly, like a year ago, you all announced that you were. For those of you who don't know, like Traefik was this project started years ago, and then a company was formed around it. And then last year you released Traefik Enterprise Edition. Tell me a little bit about that. Isn't that what your shirt is? I think you actually have the business version of the logo.
Yeah, I actually have the business version. He's more, yeah, he has a suit, So yeah, I can talk to you about this Enterprise Edition. The main things we wanted to do with the Enterprise Edition were to give you the tools to operate a cluster of traffic at scale. So we focused on our energy on improving the HA part, the scalability, and the security part. The whole architecture of Traefik has been redesigned to have a cluster with separate controllers and proxies. So basically, we talked about it just before. Traefik is able to automatically discover your cluster configuration. It will retrieve information from your containers, from your Ingress objects, from your key value store, whatever. So this is what we call providers. And in Traefik, so Traefik being the open source version, which is the flagship product, everything is done by the same binary. In the Enterprise Edition, we've split that into two different parts. So the controller is the only one responsible for retrieving the configuration. And the proxies are responsible for the routing itself. So this is the controller who will query the orchestrator and will provide the configuration to the proxies. So this is an architecture that helped us implement many different distributed features. Like we have distributed rate limiting, we have distributed max connection. It also handles better distributed Let's Encrypt, because depending on the challenge you use, you have to elect leaders to make sure that the negotiation for your certificates are handled properly. So the three selling points, we'll say, for the Enterprise Editions are HA, scalability, improved security, and distributed features. If you want to deploy, like a new configuration, new connectors to your Traefik instances, you can do that with just one command line. You have commands to import your certificates. Like if you have, in an enterprise, you often have bought many certificates. You want to deploy them, to back them up, everything. Everything is, if you want to operate a cluster, basically, it's all built in.
Yeah.
And talking about Docker, I also some features, like on Docker, if you want network discovery for your containers, this is something we can do with the Enterprise Edition thanks to the controller, because the controller will be able to attach the new networks to your proxies. So this is something that can't be done with Traefik Vanilla, but that can be done with Traefik Enterprise Edition.
So new networks that show up.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you want Traefik to be able to route the request to your containers, they have to share a common network, right?
Yeah.
If you don't do that out of the box, the Enterprise Edition will be able to see that your container doesn't have a common network and will just attach this network to the proxy.
Oh, so because that's always been sort of a challenge is when you, let me just spit that back at you, make sure I understand it. So when, by default, previously with Traefik, if you had a bunch of unrelated apps or even, apps that were part of each other, but they all needed to be behind this proxy, the design logically was to create a Docker network, Swarm network, whatever, and then the traffic would be connected to that as well as all the apps that it potentially would be proxying. But you're saying with EE, the way that works is that you don't have to have necessarily that one big network where everything is accessible, and you could then sort of protect the routes, so to speak, so that only the ones that need access get the access, but no one else, they can't see each other necessarily. You're not exposing one untrusted app to other apps through this this potential proxy network. That is what I do. All my examples have it that way, and that's pretty cool that EE can do that.
So EE does that. The controller sees that you join a new network, so it will handle that specific part.
Yeah, and all of the
proxy
operations person, anytime someone talks about, the assumption, like this product is built with the assumption of redundancy and fault tolerance, like sort of out of the box, and it reminds me of how hard it was in the old days and it wasn't that long ago, a decade ago, especially with certain products, it's still painful, where, when you want to start talking about actual true fault tolerance, especially like change tolerance and being able to update configs without rolling updates and all that. It was always very tedious, and then you got a bunch of hand wavies around how fault tolerant this thing is and whether there's any downtime or not, and that it's technically a hup, but it's small hup or whatever, and it's like it gets a little, when you start to dive into those specifics, it gets to be a little challenging. So it's nice to hear that. Especially like the back end of this and even the Let's Encrypt stuff, which a lot of us kind of take for granted that it always just works. But when you start talking about the high availability of that, that's really interesting. So,
yeah, and regarding fault tolerance, we have fault tolerance either on the routing part, like if a proxy goes down, then the others will take over, and we also have fault tolerance for configuration discovery. So you can have multiple controllers or multiple proxies at the same time. So it is HA on many different levels.
Yeah.
And even if you completely lose your control plane, like every controller, like they all go down for any reason, the proxies will still deliver the routing part based on the last known configuration. So
okay.
Even if you restart completely the cluster, no requests are lost.
Yeah, so it fails safe in that way. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I got some questions. I think let's see if some of these questions we can get through these. One question is: do you publish or share pricing for TraefikEE?
That's a good question. Of course, I know the pricing for these, but the best option is probably to contact our salespersons.
That's an engineer asking engineers about pricing. It's always a risky question.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil anything, but the pricing model, to be honest, I really believe it's quite super simple to understand. There is no crazy calculation you have to do. And we basically have, let's say, 3 options: the entry level, which is really cheap, and that comes with basic support like business hours support, and you can go up to 24/7 support with as many proxies and controllers as you want. So of course, it is more expensive, but you have a crazy service with crazy SLAs when you need help.
Yeah. One question here also. So if we have clusters running already with ingresses set up, we can install Traefik to those clusters and be up and running. Is there a Helm install? So two related questions.
Yes. So we have a hem chart. We have hem chart for the 1.x branch, and we have a hem chart for the 2.x branch. We haven't updated yet the hem chart, the official hem chart, to version 2, because that would update every cluster where Traefik is, and we don't want to mess with people's clusters. But there is a specific hem chart for version 2. So that was the question. And what was the first question?
It's I think it was talking about saying if we have clusters running already with ingresses, and I'm assuming that because their second question is about Helm, they're talking about Kubernetes. Can we install Traefik to those clusters and be up and running?
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. Traefik is an Ingress controller. So if you install Traefik, it will just uses the Ingress objects to route your request. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's see if this question, do you have some forward auth, OAuth/OIDC examples in a particular about the forwarding a JWT token to a service? We're getting nerdy now.
Yeah. So there has been many discussions around where the feature set should stop, because we really want Traefik to be a data plane, a proxy, to handle routing. And the whole authentication for now has been considered to be over the line. It shouldn't be in the same feature set, but we have a specific middleware and I guess this is what they're talking about, which is the forward authentication middleware. I'm looking for it there. So basically, you add the middleware to your route, and the request will be the headers and everything that concerns the request will be sent to an authentication server that will basically say yes or no, and will authorize the request to be forwarded to the service or not. We don't have examples with JWT or other things. I know for sure that there are people who have written articles about that. And also, if you go on GitHub and look for issues there, people have written third-party, let's say, servers that are compatible with these forward authentication mechanisms, and you should find solutions for handling OAuth and everything.
Very cool. Next one is, do we have a way of building custom middleware?
This is a great question. So this is a tricky question too, because I don't want to hype anything and to commit to anything. But providing ways for people to customize even further what they do with Traefik is really something we're working on, and we're actively working on it. If people follow what we do at Containous, it is easy to see what we do toward this specific goal. Currently, but it comes with many challenges. We can't do that easily. It requires some effort. So currently, no, unfortunately, you cannot write custom middleware with Traefik. You would get the official Traefik image. Of course, the architecture for the whole middleware has been completely redesigned and is aimed at being super easy to write a new middleware with its own configuration and so on. So writing a new middleware is really straightforward. But currently, if you want to do that, you have to compile your own Traefik with your own middleware. But we're aware of many people having done that, but currently you won't have any means to integrate that in the official Traefik image, unless, of course, your middleware is great. and then you can contribute it to Traefik itself. Yeah, I would say stay tuned for more information about that.
All right. Can Traefik be used to block? This is the last one. Then we're gonna shift topics. Can Traefik be used to block / filter access to an app by an IP address or based on request header information?
Yes, sure. And once again, this is all done by middlewares. So first, we have an IP whitelister for blocking requests from specific IPs. Well, that don't belong to this IP. And to filter middleware, it's in the rules. So routing and load balancing, if you want to go to router, and then you see the rules, and we have some rules that will act on the headers. So you can add conditions there.
Very cool. All right. I loved all the questions on Traefik. That is, clearly you've got some fans. You got some people that are definitely interested, as well as people that are already using it. I think the last one here when is 2.1 coming out? I feel like didn't that just drop?
Yeah, 2.1 is coming out. It's in release candidate since yesterday, I believe. Yeah, but yes.
RC2. Yeah, or something, yeah.
RC2, yeah.
So, it ships when it ships. That's the answer to our communities.
It'll hopefully by the end of the year, yeah, it'll be released.
All right. I'm going to put that GitHub link in there for people. That's the releases there for the open source. So let's shift just a little bit. We're still going to be talking about Traefik technically, but let's shift to talking about mesh, or I was calling it Maesh, but I think we're going to settle on just mesh. The simple service mesh.
We'll say mesh. Yeah, we like to call it the simpler service mesh. Mesh is a traditional service mesh. It is fully SMI compliant, and it handles east-west communication. So services to services in your cluster. So what flows inside the cluster. Our take on service mesh is that we didn't want to inject sidecar proxies to every services because it's really demanding on the infrastructure, and it also comes with increased complexity when it comes to manage your cluster. So our take with Mesh is to make it simple and to deploy proxies per node on your Kubernetes cluster. So instead of having thousands of sidecar proxies, you only have like one proxy per node and a controller that is responsible for configuring the mesh proxies so that your services can talk together. And for the routing part, we leverage DNS rules to send communication to the mesh proxies when a service wants to talk to another. So yeah, the approach is really simpler. And at the same time, you can do like 85% of what you can do with sidecar proxies. It's just simpler to use and to configure. On a side note, and it comes with no surprise, the mesh proxies are Traefik 2 instances. So basically, whatever you are used to do with Traefik, you can do it with mesh, but for service-to-service communication.
Very cool. And you pointed out, you were like, I think one of the first things you said was, one of the negatives or one of the challenges up front when you want to adopt a service mesh in Kubernetes is that it's not only do we have a lot of proxies already, but it's going to explode. It's going to be an order of many magnitudes more proxies. And that has always been a challenge for me. I understand, yes, they're really tiny, and but when you're an operator and you're building big servers, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of processes on that server, and half of them are the same thing. That can be a little challenging. It can be a little challenging, especially conceptually. I think sometimes the hang up is on this is too much stuff. Like there's just clearly, I don't want to double the number of processes on my servers in order to just have this new feature that my devs are asking for.
We've had people.
Go ahead.
We've had people coming to our booth asking about Maesh and telling us that they had terrible experiences with other service mesh, just because they needed twice the infrastructure they had to make it work. Yeah. So they were really interested into a different approach.
Yeah, and of course that's the great thing about all this stuff is because we're figuring out all these ways to plug into the different APIs so that they all can work and you can swap things in and out, that these different approaches can happen. Because part of I think I own the domain name Solo DevOps. Someday I'm going to have like a dedicated site there just for people that they're the only DevOps person in their team. And whenever I talk at a conference, it's usually about a quarter of the room that raise their hand that say, I'm it. Like, I'm the only one I'm the only one that's going to have to figure out how to run these servers. I think, and maybe someday we're all going to be running serverless. None of this will matter. But until then, people still have to care about servers and processes on servers and memory management and CPU management and all that. And so I always appreciate things like Traefik, where it solved 2 or 3 problems that I used to have all in one solution, and stuff like this, where I don't have to deploy, if I want to deploy a dozen apps, I don't have to deploy over a dozen proxies to do it. So I'm very excited. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, so I'm excited to play with it and get and put some feedback to y'all, because I'm already excited that this is going to potentially, for those of us at the lower end of complexity, where we don't need necessarily every possible feature of every service mesh. I like simple, which is part. If you look at the back there, there's these things like Docker and Solo, all these different companies, and they're like, I gravitate to them because they focus on simplicity first, and they don't add functionality just for the sake of adding it. So,
yeah, this is definitely our credo. We want to make things simple. You don't have to be an expert to leverage these tools.
Yeah, and then of course, for those of you that are listening, you're like, "What service mesh? I don't even know. I keep seeing things on the internet." You want to give us the elevator pitch for when and why you might need a service mesh?
I will say, well, the basic idea, I would say you start to use service mesh when you want to know what does the traffic looks like inside the cluster. So you want to get metrics of which service calls which other service, and also if you want to add credentials from service to services, you want access control, or if you want canary deployments for these services inside the cluster. Basically, you want to control the flow of your of what goes inside the cluster.
Very cool. I know that there's an increasing number of features, because now that this proxy goes in the middle between all the things, it's kind of limitless what we can throw there if we really want to.
It is limitless. Yeah.
It's a
last year.
Go ahead.
I remember. Sorry, that last year service mesh was a thing. Like everybody was talking about it. But nobody was really deploying them.
Right.
Not really. We're just getting interested into it, like discovering the concept. But this year at KubeCon, I can tell that people are starting to switch their mind and are starting to deploy them, to play with them. So I guess it's people are starting to get comfortable with the idea, or more mature on the whole microservices architectures.
Yeah, and it's funny because the tool can exist tomorrow, and I tend to forget this for others because I do it to myself, where just like we talked about the doubling the number of processes because you're going to put in some proxies. My mind lags behind my education, right? Like just because I've learned about a thing doesn't mean I'm ready to use it yet. it's rare that the day you learned of a tool, you're like, okay, I have to use this as fast as possible. And I think,
definitely.
and I think Service Mesh is one of those things where it fundamentally changes all the traffic and all the places by adding more hops and adding more functionality, but then it gives you the EBGBs at first because you feel like I can't possibly, like, how could this be good for my application? It's surely going to be wicked slow and require the double infrastructure problem, right? But yeah.
When people come to me and ask me, do I need a service mesh? I say, no. If you ask the question, you don't.
That was actually, there was a slide. There was somebody who presented. I saw it on Twitter. I don't know if I could find it fast, but there's, I was scrolling through the KubeCon pictures, and there's one from early on where someone's doing a talk on service mesh, and there's a picture, and there's a slide that says, do you need service mesh? No.
Okay, yeah.
And it was a talk on service mesh. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I can't find it, but it was early days. It was like 3 days ago, so that's like 1,000 KubeCon pictures ago. So,
right.
All right, so we're just at an hour, and I think we've covered most of the bases. Of course, there's so much more we could talk about. I know you all have other open source projects, but we're probably going to have to save that for the next episode because I surely want to talk more about Traefik, and especially as we see Mesh grow and the feature set. We did have a question, actually. Is there any plans for that to work on Swarm?
I will have, it is, if it's possible, we'll make it happen.
I will say that I don't think there's any service mesh to date that any of the community leaders, like the captains and whatnot, have got fully working on Swarm. It's just a different architecture model. And all of the service meshes are pretty tightly integrated with the Kubernetes API, so they would have to rewrite against all the Docker API essentially. So, and anyone at that scale of that problem typically is already running Kubernetes. So I can see that it's a very small market. And compare, because there's the Kubernetes market, then there's the Swarm market, and then there's a Swarm market that needs a service mesh. So we're talking about a small percentage there, but I know that there are people that would cheer and be super happy if that Swarm would have a mesh option for those of us that want the functionality but don't necessarily need a 100 server cluster. It's one of those things.
But yeah, once again, super complex problem.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all for the questions. If I missed your question, I apologize, but we had a lot of good questions today. And I'm glad we got everyone on here. So real quick, before we go, where can people find you on the internet and learn more about your stuff? You and the company.
So if I had to choose just one place, I would encourage people to use our community forum. This is where the conversation starts. But of course, if it is about feature requests or an issue about any products we have, just issues in GitHub. And if people want to contribute, pull requests are always welcome. But yeah, if you want to, just talk to us, the community forum is a great place.
Great. All right. Well, you go join the community forum.
Of course, you can ping me on Twitter.
Yes, and that's a good point because we both have our Twitter handles at the bottom of the screen there, so you can find us there. And you've got another. Is there another day of KubeCon left?
Yes, there is. Oh no! This is the last day.
This is the last day. Yeah, so you're halfway through the day almost. So we'll have fun at the rest of the conference. Hopefully you're not completely exhausted after hanging around 12,000 other like-minded computer geeks.
No, not yet. I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's always fun. It's just everybody goes home and passes out for the weekend. So, but thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm glad we got to work this out. And thank you to everyone who showed up to ask questions. It's been a great chat, and we will be off next weekend for the holidays. In America, we have Thanksgiving next week on Thursday, so we will not be doing a live show then. But you can expect to see us back here in 2 Thursdays. for another YouTube Live talking about containers, Docker, DevOps, Kubernetes, and all the things. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.